There is a photograph from 1943 taken in Bengal, India, that most history books would rather you never see. It shows a mother sitting on a dirt road holding her child. The child is already dead. The mother knows this. She has known for hours, but she will not put the body down, not yet. Not because she is in shock, not because she has lost her mind, but because putting the child down means accepting that the world she was promised, the world of order and fairness and cause and effect, was always a lie. That photograph is not just a record of tragedy. It is evidence. Evidence of a crime so large, so calculated, and so well hidden that the perpetrators were never charged. They were knighted. This is not a story about famine. Not really. Famine is just a murder weapon. This is a story about what happens to the human mind when everything, and I mean everything, is taken away. When the food is gone, when the money is gone, when the government that was supposed to protect you is the one starving you. What happens then? Because here is the part they never teach you. Some people broke. Of course they did. But some people did something else entirely. They got quiet. They stopped begging. They stopped panicking. And they started to think, not about how to get more, but about how to need less. And that shift, that tiny, almost invisible shift in the architecture of the human mind, that is the most dangerous idea any empire has ever faced. We're going to talk about the great famines, the Irish famine of 1845, the Bengal famine of 1943, the Chinese famine of 1959, and we are going to talk about them in a way you have probably never heard before. Not as tragedies, though they were. Not as political failures, though they were that too. We are going to talk about them as laboratories. Laboratories where millions of ordinary human beings were forced to confront the most fundamental question that exists. What do you actually need to survive? And what have you been tricked into believing you need? Because it turns out those are two very different lists. And the distance between them, that gap, that is where empires make their money. That is where they keep you. And a small number of people, in the worst moments in human history, figure that out. They did not write best-selling books about it. They did not start podcasts. Most of them could not read or write at all. But they discovered something that the Stoic philosophers of ancient Greece and Rome had been teaching for centuries, and they discovered it the hard way, by losing everything and realizing they were still alive, still thinking, still choosing. Let me take you to Ireland first, 1845. The potato blight hits. Now, most people know the basic outline. The potatoes rotted. People starved. 1 million died. Another 1 million emigrated. Terrible tragedy. End of story. But that is the version you get when someone does not want you to ask questions. So let us ask some questions. Ireland in 1845 was not some barren wasteland. It was producing food, enormous quantities of food, cattle, grain, butter, eggs. During the worst years of the famine, while men and women and children were dying in ditches with green stains around their mouths from trying to eat grass, ships were leaving Irish ports loaded with food, headed for England, under armed guard. Read that again. Armed guard. The food was there. It was always there. It was being escorted out of the country while the population starved to death. This was not a natural disaster. This was an export policy. The British government, under Lord John Russell, made a calculated decision. The market must not be disturbed. The principles of free trade must be upheld. If Irish peasants could not afford to buy the food that was being grown on their own land, well, that was simply the market functioning as intended. Charles Trevelyan, the man in charge of famine relief, wrote in a letter that the famine was, and I need you to hear this clearly, an effective mechanism for reducing surplus population. He called it the judgment of God on a selfish, lazy people. He was later given a knighthood for his services. So picture this. You are an Irish tenant farmer in County Cork in 1846. Your potatoes are black mush in the ground. Your landlord, who lives in London and has never set foot on your land, still demands rent. If you cannot pay, you are evicted. Your cottage is torn down, sometimes while you are still inside. Your children are swollen with hunger, and every morning you watch a cart full of grain roll past your door, headed for the port, guarded by soldiers who will shoot you if you try to take a single handful. What does this teach you? It teaches you something no philosophy lecture ever could. It teaches you that the system was never designed to feed you. You were designed to feed the system. And the moment you stop being useful, the moment you become a cost instead of a profit, the system will let you die. Not reluctantly, not with regret, with a knighthood and a letter about God's judgment. Now here is where it gets interesting. Here is the part that the history books skip. Not everyone who survived the Irish famine survived by luck. Some survived by a specific kind of thinking. They looked at the situation clearly, without fantasy, without hope, without the comforting lie that someone was coming to save them. They assessed what they had, not what they wished they had, not what they deserved, what they had. A handful of nettles, a bit of seaweed, knowledge of the land, relationships with neighbors, and they made a cold, rational decision to stay alive with exactly those resources and nothing more. This is not optimism. Optimism would have killed them. Optimism is sitting by the road, waiting for the relief cart that is never coming. This is something harder than optimism. This is clarity. And it is the exact same principle that a man named Epictetus, a former slave in ancient Rome, had articulated almost 2,000 years earlier. Focus only on what you can control. Release everything else. Not because it feels good, because it is the only strategy that works when the world is actively trying to destroy you. Let me take you to Bengal now, 1943. The Second World War is raging. Japan has taken Burma and is threatening India's eastern border. Bengal, one of the most fertile regions on earth, begins to starve. 3 million people will die. 3 million. In a region that was producing rice. And once again, the food was there. The rice was there. But it was being diverted. The British colonial government, under the direction of Winston Churchill, made a series of decisions that created the famine. Rice stocks were shipped out to feed soldiers elsewhere. Local rice markets were disrupted by military requisitioning. Boats were destroyed along the coastline, thousands of them, because the British feared a Japanese coastal invasion and did not want the enemy to have transport. But those boats were not military vessels. They were fishing boats. They were the boats that Bengali fishermen and traders used to move food from surplus areas to deficit areas. Destroying them was like cutting the veins in a body and then wondering why the organs failed. Churchill was asked to divert food shipments back to Bengal. He refused. His response, recorded in the minutes of a war cabinet meeting, was to ask why Gandhi had not yet died if the famine was so severe. This is not a rumor. This is in the official record. The man who is celebrated as the savior of Western democracy, the man whose face is on the 5-pound note, made a joke about the starvation of 3 million people, and he was not joking out of ignorance. He knew exactly what was happening. He simply did not care. Indians, he once said, were a beastly people with a beastly religion. Their deaths were, in his calculation, an acceptable cost of winning the war. Now walk with me through the streets of Calcutta in October of 1943. The city is full of the dying. They have come from the countryside, from the villages, walking for days, carrying children who will not survive the journey. They collapse on the sidewalks. They lie in rows along the tram lines. The middle-class residents of Calcutta step over them on their way to work. The restaurants are open. The cinemas are showing films. Life goes on for those who can afford it. This is not a scene from the apocalypse. This is a scene from a Tuesday. And that is what makes it so important. Because famine does not look like the end of the world. It looks like the world continuing perfectly well for some people, while it ends completely for others. It looks like selective apocalypse. And if you understand that, you understand something about every economic system that has ever existed. But in the middle of this horror, something happened that almost no one documented at the time. Communities formed, not charities, not organizations, not institutions, with letterheads and boards of directors. Informal networks. A woman in a village who had a clay pot and some salt would cook whatever scraps could be gathered, nettles, banana stems, the cores of water lilies, and distribute it to whoever came. No ledger, no receipts, no conditions, just survival, organized at the most basic human level. These were not saints. They were not performing heroism. They were making a calculation that the Stoics would have recognized instantly. I cannot control the war. I cannot control the government. I cannot control the price of rice. But I can control this pot. I can control this fire. I can control whether the person next to me eats tonight. And so that is what I will do. This is what I mean by quiet rebellion. It is not protest. It is not revolution. It is the refusal to participate in your own destruction by waiting for permission to survive. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who spent half his reign fighting wars and plagues, wrote something in his private journal that could have been written by any one of those Bengali women standing over a clay pot. He wrote that the obstacle in the path becomes the path. He was not being poetic. He was being tactical. When everything is taken from you, when every external support is removed, you find out what you are actually made of. And more importantly, you find out what you actually need. The answer, almost always, is far less than you thought. Now let me take you to China. 1959, Mao Zedong has launched the Great Leap Forward, a program designed to transform China from an agricultural economy into an industrial powerhouse in 5 years. It is, without exaggeration, the most catastrophic economic policy in human history. Peasants are ordered to abandon their fields and melt down their farming tools to produce steel in backyard furnaces. The steel is useless. It is brittle, impure, good for nothing. But the farming tools are gone, and the fields are untended. And then the reports start coming in from the provinces. The harvest has failed, not because of drought, not because of flood, because no one was allowed to farm. Local officials, terrified of Mao, sent false reports claiming record harvests. The central government, believing these reports, increases grain requisitions from the countryside. They are taking food from people who have no food. And when the peasants begin to starve, the officials call it sabotage. They call it counter-revolutionary hoarding. They punish the starving for being hungry. Between 1959 and 1961, somewhere between 15 million and 55 million people died. The numbers are still debated because the Chinese government has never fully opened the records. But even the lowest estimate makes it the deadliest famine in recorded history, and it was entirely, completely, 100% man-made. Not a single weather event caused it. Not a single crop disease, just ideology. Just the belief that if the theory says the harvest should be good, then the harvest is good, regardless of what is actually rotting in the fields. In Anhui province, a man named Chen was a village leader. This is not a famous figure. You will not find him in any textbook. His story survived only because his granddaughter told it to a journalist decades later. When the famine began, Chen gathered the remaining families in his village and told them something remarkable. He told them to forget everything the government had said, to stop pretending the harvest was fine, to stop attending the mandatory political meetings. Instead, he divided the communal land into small private plots and told each family to grow whatever they could, sweet potatoes, beans, anything. He told them to hide what they grew, to eat at night, to keep their children quiet. This was, in Mao's China, an act punishable by death. It was capitalism. It was counter-revolution. It was, technically, treason. Chen did it anyway. His village survived. Most of the surrounding villages did not. What Chen did was not politics. It was not ideology. It was the most ancient form of human intelligence, the ability to look at reality as it actually is and respond to it, regardless of what you have been told reality should be. Epictetus would have recognized it. Seneca would have recognized it. Marcus Aurelius would have recognized it. Because that is the core of Stoic philosophy, stripped of all the marble busts and Latin quotations and university reading lists. It is the simple, brutal, life-saving practice of seeing what is real, not what is comfortable, not what is approved, what is real, and then acting on that reality with whatever you have, even if what you have is a handful of sweet potato seeds and the knowledge that if you are caught, you will be shot. The system, any system, works by controlling what you see, by controlling what you believe you need. The British Empire told the Irish they needed the market that the invisible hand would provide. It did not. The British Empire told the Bengalis they needed the war effort that sacrifice now meant freedom later. It did not. Mao told the Chinese peasants they needed a communist party, that collective farming would create abundance. It created graves. Every single one of these systems operated on the same principle. Convince people that their survival depends on the system, and they will serve the system even as it kills them. Convince a man that he cannot feed himself without the market, and he will starve before he touches the grain on the cart rolling past his door. Convince a woman that the government knows best, and she will watch her child die before she plants a secret garden. The Stoics understood this trap, not because they were smarter than everyone else, but because many of them had been caught in it. Epictetus was a slave. His leg was broken by his master. He could not control his body, his location, his daily life. He could control his mind. And from that single point of control, he built an entire philosophy that has outlasted the Roman Empire, the British Empire, and every other empire that has ever tried to own people. The philosophy is simple enough to fit in a single sentence. You do not control what happens to you. You control how you respond. That is it. That is the whole thing. And it sounds like a greeting card until you are standing in the ruins of your village with nothing left but a clay pot and a decision to make. Here is what the famines taught. Here is the lesson that cost millions of lives to learn. You have been trained to be dependent, not by accident, by design. Every economy, every political system, every advertising campaign, every social media algorithm is engineered to make you believe that you need more than you have, that you are not enough as you are. That survival requires participation in a system that does not care whether you live or die. And the people who saw through this lie, the ones who survived the worst that humanity has ever inflicted on itself, they all did the same thing. They simplified. They went local. They got small. They stopped waiting for rescue. They stopped believing in the system. Not with anger, not with slogans, with a pot of nettles and a neighbor who was also hungry. This is not ancient history. This is a blueprint. Right now, today, you are inside a system that is designed to keep you dependent on credit, on consumption, on the belief that your worth is measured by what you own, on the quiet terror that if you stop earning, stop buying, stop performing, you will disappear. The famines prove that this terror is manufactured. It is the same terror that kept Irish peasants watching grain carts roll past, the same terror that kept Bengali fishermen from building new boats, the same terror that kept Chinese farmers attending political meetings instead of planting food. The system works because you believe it. The moment you stop believing it, the system loses its power. Not all of its power, but enough. Enough for you to think clearly, enough for you to see what you actually need, enough for you to realize that the gap between what you need and what you have been told you need is where your freedom lives. The Stoics had a word for this. They called it apatheia, which does not mean apathy in the modern sense. It means freedom from being controlled by your passions, your fears, your manufactured desires. It means looking at the world with clear eyes and asking the only question that matters: what can I do right now with what I have? Not what should I do? Not what do I wish I could do? What can I do? That question, asked honestly, is the beginning of every survival story ever told. It is the question the Irish tenant farmer asked when he walked away from his ruined cottage and toward the coast. It is the question the Bengali woman asked when she lit a fire under a clay pot. It is the question Chen asked when he divided the communal land into private plots. And it is the question you should be asking right now. Not because a famine is coming, maybe it is, maybe it is not, but because the same forces that created those famines, the concentration of power, the worship of ideology over reality, the willingness to sacrifice human beings for economic abstractions, those forces have not gone anywhere. They have gotten smarter. They have gotten subtler. They do not send grain carts under armed guard anymore. They send targeted advertisements. They do not destroy fishing boats. They destroy your attention span. They do not requisition your harvest. They requisition your time, your data, your creativity, your peace of mind. And they do it so smoothly, so elegantly, that you do not even notice you are being starved. Not of food, of agency, of clarity, of the simple animal knowledge that you can survive without their permission. Survival is a quiet rebellion because the loudest revolutions are the easiest to crush. The British crushed the Irish rebellions. Mao crushed the counter-revolutionaries. Every empire knows how to deal with a man holding a flag and shouting, but they have no idea what to do with a woman who simply stops needing them, who grows her own food, who repairs her own tools, who teaches her children to think instead of to consume, who looks at the system and says, quietly, without drama, without a manifesto, I see what you are, and I am done. That is the lesson. That is what the famines taught. Not how to suffer, how to stop suffering unnecessarily, how to tell the difference between a real need and a manufactured one, how to hold on to your mind when everything else has been taken, how to sit in the ruins and light a fire, not because you believe things will get better, but because the fire is yours. And that, in the end, is enough.